The wind howled like a wild beast across the desolate Colorado plateau, whipping up flurries of snow and rattling the dry bones of the earth. Winter had come hard and fast this year, unrelenting and merciless. The sun dipped low behind jagged cliffs, painting the sky with streaks of orange and blood red that soon faded to twilight's cold blue. John McAllister had been riding for hours, the leather of his saddle creaking beneath him and the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves a faint comfort against the vast emptiness. He was a man carved from the frontier itself, tall, weather-beaten, with eyes sharp as a hawk's and a jaw set firm like the mountains. His pack was light, just enough to survive a few days alone in the wilderness. But tonight, the biting cold gnawed at him like a living thing. Ahead, something caught his eye, a pair of dark shapes huddled beneath a scraggly pine, their breath rising in thin white clouds. He pulled his horse to a cautious stop and squinted through the swirling snow. Two figures, young women, cloaked in tattered blankets that barely kept out the chill. John's hand instinctively hovered near the rifle strapped to his saddle, but he saw no threat. Instead, he saw desperation. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching on frozen ground, and approached with quiet steps. "Hey there," he called out, his voice low and steady. "You folks all right out here in this weather?" The two looked up, eyes wide and frightened. One was older, with dark, proud features and sharp eyes that betrayed a fierce spirit beneath her exhaustion. The other was younger, softer, but just as worn by the cold and hunger. We're lost," the older woman said in halting English, her voice barely a whisper. "My sister, she can't go on." John didn't ask questions. He tugged off his coat and draped it around the sister's shoulders. "Come with me. Ain't safe out here tonight." They accepted silently, following him to the warmth of his campfire. As he lit the fire, John noticed the faded remnants of traditional Apache jewelry, a silver necklace here, a beaded bracelet there. It told a story of hardship and survival far from the comfortable towns and ranches where settlers lived. He rummaged through his pack and found a flask of whiskey, which he offered to the women. The older sister took a small sip and handed it to her sibling. They warmed themselves slowly, the fire casting flickering shadows across their faces. "What's your names?" John asked, keeping his voice gentle. "Running Deer," said the elder sister, her eyes meeting his. "And this is Little Bird." John nodded, understanding the weight behind those names. "Well, Running Deer, Little Bird, you're safe now. I'll get you someplace warm and fed." The night grew colder, but around the fire, there was a fragile sense of hope. John McAllister, a man hardened by the wild frontier, had just stumbled on two souls as lost as he was. Little did he know, this chance meeting would change all their lives, binding them together in ways none of them could have foreseen. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the bitter night air as John McAllister watched Running Deer and Little Bird settle in by its warm glow. The wind outside wasn't relenting. It bit at their skin through the thin layers of cloth and leather. But inside this small circle of light, the cold seemed a distant enemy. John pulled his coat tighter around himself, eyes flickering between the two sisters. Their faces were still pale and drawn from the cold and hunger, but there was a stubborn spirit in their gaze, something he'd seen many times in the unforgiving West, the kind that refused to break, no matter the odds. "You're lucky I found you when I did," he said softly, his voice rough like gravel but kind. "Out here, nightfall like this, it'll take what it wants if you don't respect it." Running Deer looked up, her dark eyes glistening with something that might have been gratitude or maybe just relief. "We didn't know where to go," she whispered. "Our village was gone, burned by soldiers. We ran north, but the snow. It's hard to travel." John's heart clenched. Stories like hers were all too common these days, settlers and soldiers pushing deeper into Apache lands, leaving destruction in their wake. He'd been a scout once, worked for the army, but left when the violence made him sick. Now, he lived on his own terms, a man who answered only to the open sky and the rhythm of his horse's hooves. "Tell me what you remember," he said. "Maybe I can help you find your way back or somewhere safer." Running Deer hesitated, then nodded. "We were at the Chiricahua Mountains, near the reservation, but soldiers came, burning homes, killing what they could find. We escaped, but lost everything." Little Bird shivered, pulling her blanket closer. "We walked for days, but the snow kept falling, and we had no food." John sighed deeply, rubbing his hands together by the fire. "I know a cabin not far from here, abandoned but dry and warm. We'll rest there, find some supplies. Tomorrow, we'll plan." The sisters exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. Despite their exhaustion, there was a flicker of hope. John saw it, and he felt something inside him shift, a protective instinct, one that wasn't there for anyone else on the trail. He took off his boots, stretching sore muscles, and glanced at the sky. Stars blinked through the clearing, cold and clear. The wildness of the West was relentless, but it had a beauty all its own. A beauty John wanted to share with these two brave women who'd survived so much. "John," Running Deer said softly, breaking the silence. "Why do you help us? You don't even know us." He shrugged, a slow smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe I just hate seeing folks suffer. Or maybe I'm looking for a reason to stay around a bit longer." There was a pause, then Little Bird laughed quietly, a sound like wind chimes in the breeze. "You're a strange man, John McAllister." "Strange ain't a bad thing out here," he said, leaning back against a tree stump. "You'll find, living in the wild, you gotta be a little strange. Otherwise, it'll eat you alive." Night deepened, but the fire kept them warm. And for the first time in weeks, Running Deer and Little Bird felt safe. John could see the weight of the world lifting, just a little, from their shoulders. When he finally turned in for the night, he left his rifle within reach and a watchful eye on the sisters. There was something about them more than just survival. A connection, maybe, the kind the West was full of, buried beneath the dust and the gunfire and the endless sky. John didn't know what the coming days would bring. But one thing was certain. This cold night was the beginning of a new story, one that none of them could have imagined. The first light of dawn crept over the rim of the Rockies, casting long shadows through the skeletal trees. The cold had eased a little, but the snow still lay thick and unyielding, covering the rough terrain like a heavy white blanket. John McAllister woke with a stiff back and a sense of purpose tightening in his chest. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb Running Deer and Little Bird, still curled up near the dying embers of last night's fire. They looked peaceful now, their dark hair tangled and dusted with frost, their faces softened by sleep. John thought about how few comforts the West afforded, and how much courage it took just to survive another day. He shook the snow from his coat and gestured for the sisters to follow. The cabin wasn't far, an old homestead left to rot after its owner headed west with the gold rush, chasing dreams that never panned out. It was a small place, barely standing, but it was shelter from the storm. When they reached it, John pushed open the door with a groan of rusted hinges. Inside was cold and musty, but dry. He set to work lighting a fire in the stone hearth, the flame roaring to life and chasing the chill from the room. Running Deer looked around cautiously, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "It's safe here," John said, pulling some dry wood from a corner. "At least for now." They shared what little food John had, hardtack biscuits and jerky, and talked quietly about what came next. John could see the weariness etched deep into their bones, but also the flicker of determination in their eyes. "I don't know where our people are," Running Deer said, voice low. "The soldiers took everything. If we find other Apache, maybe we can rebuild, or find a new home." John nodded slowly. "There's a trading post a few days' ride south. Settlers, hunters, anyone who passes through, could be a place to find help." Little Bird looked at John, a quiet strength behind her words. "And what will happen to us here? To me? To my sister?" John hesitated, then spoke from a place deep inside himself, a place shaped by years of solitude and loss. "You won't be alone. I'll help you, whatever it takes." The sisters exchanged a look, and for a moment, a fragile bond formed, one born of hardship and hope. Days passed as they made the cabin into a livable refuge. John hunted in the cold woods, bringing back rabbits and whatever game he could find. Running Deer and Little Bird tended the fire, patched holes in the cabin walls, and kept watch through the long nights. At times, John caught himself watching them, how Running Deer moved with quiet confidence, and how Little Bird's laughter could brighten even the bleakest day. He felt a stirring in his chest he hadn't known in years, a yearning for something beyond the lonely trail. But there was a shadow looming. The soldiers were still out there, and settlers were pushing ever deeper into Apache lands. John knew it wouldn't be long before trouble found them again. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Running Deer pulled John aside, her eyes searching his. "You saved us from the cold," she said, "but there's something more you want to say." John looked at her, then over to Little Bird, who was mending a torn blanket nearby. "It's true. I came out here chasing ghosts, but finding you both, it's changed things." Running Deer's voice was steady, but there was fire beneath it. "We are grateful, and we want to stay with you, not just for shelter, but for something real." John's heart pounded in his chest. The Wild West was full of broken promises and fleeting dreams, but here, in this little cabin, something felt honest and lasting. "And you?" he asked, turning to Little Bird. She smiled softly. I want the same. We want to be with you as wives, if you'll have us. John swallowed hard. 2 women, both strong and brave, offering their hearts. It was a choice unlike any he'd faced before. The fire flickered, casting shadows across their faces. The frontier was a hard place, but maybe, just maybe, it could be home. The days in the cabin passed with a slow rhythm, marked by the crackle of firewood, the crunch of snow underfoot, and quiet conversations beneath wide star-studded skies. John McAllister had settled into a routine that included hunting, repairing the cabin, and sharing stolen moments with Running Deer and Little Bird. The 3 had become a small family forged by necessity and growing affection, but peace was a fragile thing on the frontier. One cold afternoon, as John returned from the woods with a freshly caught rabbit slung over his saddle, he noticed the snow-disturbed hoofprints not his own, too large for deer or elk. His fingers instinctively brushed against the rifle at his side. Someone had passed through recently. Back at the cabin, he found Running Deer staring out the window, eyes sharp as an eagle's. Trouble is coming, she said quietly. Soldiers or hunters, they are never far behind. Little Bird's lips pressed into a thin line. We can't stay here much longer. We need a plan. John nodded grimly. The West was no place for waiting. They had to move before the storm caught them. That night, around the fire, the 3 talked long into the dark. John suggested heading west, toward the mountains, where the terrain was rougher and less traveled. It would be harder for pursuers to follow. Running Deer agreed but warned. The mountains hold dangers to wild animals, harsh weather, and unforgiving cliffs. Little Bird's eyes searched John's. Whatever happens, we want to be together. We trust you. John felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. These 2 women had survived so much already. Fire, snow, loss, and now, they placed their trust in him. But trust meant responsibility. The next morning, John packed their meager belongings. They left the cabin just as the sun began to burn through the gray sky, casting pale light over the frozen landscape. The journey was brutal. Snowdrifts slowed their progress, and biting winds whipped through the valleys. Running Deer moved with quiet grace, her knowledge of the land a guide through the white wilderness. Little Bird was strong but weary, her laughter less frequent, her steps heavier. One evening, as they made camp beneath a ridge, John heard the distant howl of wolves. The wilderness was watching, waiting. Suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the night. John's head snapped up, heart pounding. Get down, he hissed, pulling the sisters low behind a fallen log. Shadows moved in the firelight, figures cloaked in dark coats and rifles gleaming, men hunting more than just game. The soldiers had found them. Show yourselves, a gruff voice barked. This land belongs to the United States now. You're trespassing. John stood slowly, hands raised but eyes blazing. These women are under my protection. We're just passing through. The leader sneered. You can't hide from the law. Hand them over. Running Deer's eyes flashed with fierce pride. You won't take us. We're not prisoners. The standoff stretched taut, the cold air thick with tension. John made a quick decision. We're moving now. With a sharp whistle, he bolted into the trees. The sisters closed behind. Bullets kicked up snow around them as they ran, hearts hammering like thunder in the silent woods. They ducked behind rocks, pushed through thorny brush, and climbed steep slopes until the soldiers' shouts faded into the distance. Panting and shaken, John looked at the sisters. We're not safe yet, but we're not beaten. Running Deer wiped a tear from her cheek, a fierce smile breaking through. We fight for our freedom. And for each other. Little Bird nodded. We're together, John, no matter what comes. The Wild West had tested them, and it was far from done. The mountain air was thin and biting cold, each breath a sharp reminder of how far from civilization they'd traveled. John McAllister led Running Deer and Little Bird deeper into the wilds. The narrow trail winding through towering pines dusted in snow. The world around them was silent, save for the crunch of their boots and the distant call of a lone hawk. After the narrow escape from the soldiers, every step felt like walking a tightrope between safety and disaster. But the fire between them was stronger than fear. One evening, as they huddled around a small campfire beneath a canopy of stars, John watched the sisters closely. Running Deer was mending his worn leather gloves with nimble fingers, her eyes steady and calm. Little Bird sat beside him, her gaze soft but fierce, her hand resting lightly on his. John felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known since long before the war. Before the endless trails and loneliness. Here in the wilderness, with these 2 women who had endured so much, the cold outside seemed to fade. Tell me about your people, John said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. Running Deer looked up, her voice steady but filled with a quiet pride. "The Apache are strong. We live by the land, respect the earth and the sky. Our stories are in the wind and the stars." Little Bird nodded. "We were taught to be brave, to fight when we must, but to seek peace when we can." John swallowed hard, the weight of their words sinking deep. "I'm no stranger to fighting, but I've never had much of a home. Maybe this could be one." A flicker of a smile crossed Running Deer's face. "You've already given us shelter. And hope." Little Bird's hand tightened on his. "We want to build something together. A family." John's gaze shifted between them, two women, each fierce and gentle in their own way. Each offering a future he hadn't dared to imagine. But the wild had other plans. The next morning, a low rumble shook the earth, the distant sound of hooves pounding. John's eyes narrowed. "Trouble's coming." He helped the sisters to their feet. "We've got to move fast." They rode hard through the dense forest, the pounding behind them growing louder, a band of mercenaries hired by landowners eager to push anyone off the land. Men without mercy, chasing ghosts and gold. The chase was desperate. John's horse stumbled on a hidden route, but he pulled it up just in time. Running Deer's horse reared, and Little Bird's voice rang out, steady and clear. John felt the wild surge through his veins, fight or flight, but there was no turning back. Not when the two women who'd become his world were counting on him. As the sun dipped low, they found refuge in a hidden cave, a secret place Running Deer had known from childhood. Inside, the firelight danced off rough stone walls, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to hold its breath. John looked at the sisters, tired but unbroken. "We're safe here, for now." Running Deer reached for his hand. "Together, we can face whatever comes." Little Bird smiled softly, resting her head on his shoulder. In the Wild West, where life was as harsh as the land itself, bonds forged in fire were the strongest kind. The cave was a refuge, but it felt like a prison, too. Days stretched long and cold inside those shadowed walls, the snow piling thick outside like a silent reminder of the dangers lurking beyond. John McAllister sat near the fire, his eyes flickering between Running Deer and Little Bird. Both wrapped in blankets but glowing with a fierce resolve. They were more than just survivors now. They were a family, bound not by blood but by choice and love. Running Deer's voice broke the quiet. "John, we can't hide forever. They'll come, and next time, there won't be a chance to run." Little Bird nodded. "We need a plan, a way to fight back." John swallowed hard. The wild had hardened him, but this was different. Protecting these women meant everything. "We'll make a stand, but we need allies." He looked toward the small pouch at his belt, a handful of bullets, a knife, and the sharp promise of survival. His mind raced through old contacts, men who owed him favors, friends in nearby towns. But reaching out meant risk, the kind that could cost lives. That night, John lay awake, thoughts tangled like the thorny brush outside. He reached out, taking Running Deer's hand first, strong, steady, a lifeline in the cold dark. Then Little Bird's fingers found his other hand, warm and soft like the promise of dawn. They were here. With him. "John," Running Deer whispered, "we will follow you anywhere." His heart thundered. "And I'll never let you down." The next day, they rode out of the cave's shadow, eyes sharp and spirits fierce. They knew the mercenaries would be waiting, hungry for blood and land. But John was ready. The battle came swift and brutal. Gunfire shattered the silence of the forest as they fought to hold the narrow pass. John moved like a shadow, rifle cracking, while Running Deer's arrow flew true. And Little Bird wielded a hatchet with surprising strength. Blood-stained, the snow, and the air was thick with smoke and desperation. At one point, a mercenary lunged at John from behind. The cowboy twisted, knocking the man to the ground and driving his knife home. Breathing hard, John stood over the fallen man and scanned the battlefield. The sisters fought fiercely beside him, two flames burning bright against the cold white world. When the last shot rang out and silence fell, the trio looked at each other, bruised but undefeated. Running Deer stepped close, her breath mingling with his. "We fought for more than survival today." Little Bird's eyes gleamed with tears and triumph. "We fought for our future." John pulled them both into a fierce embrace, the heat of their bodies a balm against the chill. Together, he promised, always. The Wild West was unforgiving, but here, in the heart of the storm, they'd found something stronger than fear, love. The first light of dawn stretched across the valley like a soft promise, painting the snow-covered land in hues of gold and rose. The battle was over, but its echoes still lingered in the cold air, silent reminders of the price paid and the fight won. John McAllister stood atop a rocky outcrop, looking out over the vast wilderness. Beside him, Running Deer and Little Bird rode close, their faces bright with determination and a spark of something new, hope. The three had survived the worst that West could throw at them: brutal cold, ruthless men, and the weight of a world that seemed determined to erase their existence. But together, they had carved out a space where freedom and love could grow. "Where to now?" Running Deer asked, her voice steady, but with the softness of someone ready to follow. John smiled, the weight of loneliness finally lifting from his shoulders. "There's a small town not far from here, Red Rock. It's rough and wild, but there's a chance to start fresh. Maybe even build a home." Little Bird glanced at him, eyes sparkling with quiet joy. "A place where we're not hunted." "No more running," John promised, his hand finding theirs in the crisp morning air. Their journey had been long and hard, but now it felt like the beginning of something real, a family bound, not by blood, but by the shared scars and dreams of a rugged land. As they rode down the slope, toward the unknown, the sun rose higher, chasing the shadows away. The West was wild and untamed, but in that vastness lay freedom and a future waiting to be claimed. John looked at Running Deer and Little Bird, and for the first time in years, he felt at peace. Together, they would face whatever came next, because in the wild frontier, sometimes the fiercest battles bring the sweetest victories.